In this video, we're going to review the concepts of observation and inference. Remember that we saw in the last lesson what science is. We saw a definition, and we learned that science is not just knowledge, but rather a process used to discover or generate or discover that knowledge to understand the universe, the world around us. So we know that science is not made up, but is instead based on actual evidence collected in the real world. And that evidence can come from a few places. It can come from observations and also from inferences. If you missed a lesson and you were in class, or you were not in class, your teacher likely did a little demonstration where you had to record some observations, and many of you sometimes recorded inferences instead of observations. So the point right now is to define observations, define inferences, and understand the difference between the two. Because in science, we're going to be making observations and inferences in a lot of our labs. So observations really refers to noting facts using your senses, our five senses. Our five main senses, I should say. And those senses, are five fives, are five senses. And those senses are sight, taste, touch, smell, and also hearing. When you're making observations using your senses, you can do several types of observations. The two main types are the quantitative type and the qualitative type. Quantitative refers to a number. Observations that you describe using numbers. So if you measure, let's say, plant height, you might measure that in centimeters. That would be a quantitative observation. You can also have qualitative observations, quality. That's where you describe using more descriptive words. So you might describe the color of a plant, the texture, the smell, not so much with numbers. So what I'd like you to do in this practice problem here is classify the following observations as being quantitative or qualitative observations. Pause the video, try it out, then we'll take it up. The bird is blue. You're describing the color of the bird with words. That is more qualitative. There are 5 birds. You've counted 5 birds as a number, so that's more quantity, quantitative. The pizza has a radius of 30 centimeters. It looks like a measurement with numbers, so also quantitative. There are 250 mils of coffee in a cup. 250 mils is a measurement with numbers, also quantitative. The coffee tastes bitter. You're describing it. That's an observation that's more descriptive in nature, not a number. So I would say that's also qualitative. And then we get to inferences. So inferences are not exactly observations, but they're more explanations or interpretations of what you're observing. So what's important to understand is that inferences are not seen directly, but they can be concluded based on your observations. So an inference is more of a statement that interprets or explains what you're observing. So the most common example given for inferences or for an inference would be if you touch a door and the door feels hot. That is an observation. The door feels hot. The inference you might make, even though you don't see what's on the other side, is that there might be a fire on the other side. So you're inferring that there's a fire on the other side because the door feels hot. So even though you don't directly see it, you're interpreting, explaining the observation using an inference. So here we have an example. There's a cat and there's spilled milk. So suppose the observation here in this case is that there's some spilt milk and there was no one in the house but the cat. So you observed that there was some spilt milk and you inferred that the one responsible for spilling the milk must have been the cat. So both observations and inferences are used in science when we're gathering evidence. For example, just think about the atom, right? We know the atom has a nucleus, and in the nucleus there's protons, electrons, and then there's electrons buzzing around. Protons and neutrons in the nucleus, and electrons buzzing around the nucleus. We can't see the atom, and we couldn't back then, but we used inferences from experimental observations to figure out what the atom might have looked like. So for example, when we shot positive particles at the middle of the atom, we saw some very large deflections. So we saw that the particles would deflect. That was our observation. The inference is that there must be some small positive charge in the nucleus, and that's the protons. So we're able to, even though we couldn't directly see the protons, we can make an inference that there were some small positive charges in the nucleus based on the observation that positive charges would deflect when they hit some small part in a sample of atoms. So in this video, we saw the definition of observations and inferences, along with a few examples. In the next video, you're going to do some practice problems. You're going to jot down some observations and inferences for a variety of different scenarios. You can try these problems ahead of time and then use the next video to check your work.